Welcome back to another episode of Microdose with TheMoDose Cannabis. I'm Mo, and today we are going to be discussing our grow space. So we're going to be talking about the selection of your grow area. We're going to talk about whether you need a tent or not, because some people don't actually need a grow tent. We're going to talk about some best practices, some considerations, and I'm going to assemble a tent in a really sped up version. But this video is not dedicated to the actual deep water culture setup, the lighting, the ventilation. This is just the grow space selection and setup. So now that we've got that covered, let's go into the details. Okay, so first things first, let's talk about our grow space. So when I first started growing, I literally only had one place to grow. So, I mean, that was an easy situation for me. It was like, I can only fit it here, so I got a grow tent, and that was my selection. Now, there are certain situations where you might have a closet or a basement or an attic, and you want to grow there, and you maybe don't want to use a grow tent. Totally okay, but you do need to keep in mind a few things before you make that decision. So first, if you have a closet or something, is there going to be any light penetration in there? That's probably the biggest concern, right? So if you're on a specific light schedule, 18 hours on, 6 hours off, and during the 6 hours when it's off, and maybe the closet door doesn't close all the way, light penetrates in, you need a grow tent, okay? You need to make sure that your plants, when they're dark, they get dark, because your plant can turn into a hermaphrodite, your plant can get stressed out, and then it impacts your bud. You might not get bud at all, okay? So definitely keep that in mind. If you're using, or if you're not gonna use a grow tent, you do have a little bit less control over the temperature and humidity, which is fine. You just have to keep that, top of mind and make sure you stay on it. Another thing to keep in mind, if you're not using a grow space or a grow tent, and even if you are using a grow tent, keep in mind the flooring that's underneath, okay? So if you are growing on carpet, or if you are growing on like nice hardwood floors, you wanna make sure that your floors are protected, okay? So especially with carpet, you need to be very careful, because when you're mixing your solutions or changing out your reservoir, water is probably going to splatter. You don't wanna have gnats or bugs attracted to the wet carpet. So one quick thing you can do is you can get these, they're completely optional, but these risers, and use a few pieces of sturdy plywood, and then put your tent on top of that, just so that there's like some nice air between the carpet and your grow tent. You can also put down some tarp underneath the risers, just to protect your flooring. So definitely want to go that route, especially if you're growing on carpet, or if you have really nice hardwood floors that you don't want to get any nutrients on, and you don't want to do that. Trust me. All right, so let's talk about temperatures. So I did already mention that if you're not using a grow tent, that you have a little bit, or likely have a little bit less control over your temperature and humidity. Fine. If you're going to grow in your attic or your basement, you also want to be mindful of the ideal temperature for growing cannabis, right? So if you're using the deep water culture method, your water, you don't really want it to sit above about 72 degrees, right? So it ebbs and flows. Yes, it gets a little warmer at times, but you don't want it to be consistently like in the 80s. You're gonna have all types of problems with, fungus and bacteria and whatnot. Of course, you can always just throw in, water bottles that have been frozen to cool down your water, or get a chiller, but just spare yourself, okay? If it's really hot, or same thing if you have the basement. You don't want it to drop below 65 degrees consistently. You don't want it to be too cold. So you definitely I would recommend your temperature and your humidity checker, and just put it in your attic and your basement and see what the temperatures are. If you have a grow tent, put it in there too to see, because you do have to also keep in mind that your lights and just having the insulation of the tent itself will warm things up a bit, but directionally you'll be able to see, hey, it's like 1,000 degrees in my attic, maybe this isn't the best idea. Another thing though, if you're growing in like an attic and it tends to be warmer, instead of having your grow lights on during the middle of the day when it's already hot, turn your grow lights on at night and then keep the dark period during the day. If you have a grow tent, there's no concern because your grow tent will keep everything to keep the light tempered.
You can do the same thing reverse. In the basement, you can keep your light on at nighttime when it's cooler, and then in the daytime, keep it off. But again, you'll have to just check and see what the temperatures actually are, where they fall, and make your choice from there.
So general considerations about the actual tent size and the space needed for them. So rule of thumb, if you're growing in a 5-gallon reservoir, you want to give your plant at least 2 feet by 2 feet worth of space. So 2 feet by 2 feet per plant. I am growing mine at about 1.5 by 1.5, but especially if you're a new grower, just try to give yourself a little bit of grace, okay? Another thing to keep in the back of your mind is that the height of your tent. So the first tent that I ever got, and mind you, tents come in all shapes and sizes. The first tent that I ever got was 36 inches tall. 36 inches tall. I set it up and I was like, what am I doing here? Like, it was way too small. I wouldn't recommend you grow in anything less than 63 inches, especially as a new grower. You have to remember that your plants are going to double in flower, right? So they're going to get pretty tall, even though we're going to be training them a lot to keep them even and low. They're going to grow. So, you know, you have to think about your plants hitting your lights. That's definitely something that can happen, and it can happen very quickly. So you want to make sure that you are accounting for the dimensions of your actual light and then how high your plant is going to grow at each phase. So from seedlings to veg to flower, and make your best decision from that. But again, I would recommend nothing less than 63 inches in height.
If you are growing without a grow tent, just so you know, your home won't smell like cannabis until your plants get to the flower stage. Once your plant goes into flower, that's when those terpenes or the smell of cannabis are really released. So you will want to make sure you have a carbon filter. I also do recommend that you keep the same setup, use an inline fan, you know, the ducting, and your carbon filter, just to make this process as streamlined as possible.
All right, so I'm back and I have a bunch of shit here out of nowhere, right? So I'm actually about to set up this tent, and it's pretty self-explanatory, pretty straightforward with the instructions, but you're gonna have 16 pieces that look like this for your support beams, and then you're gonna have 2 other ones with hooks on them that is gonna be the top support bar for our grow tent. We're also gonna have these observation windows. Don't forget to put this cover on the back observation window before you put your tent wherever it is, especially if you can't reach to the back of it easily. So mine's going in a closet, and the first time I set it up, I was like, oh shit, I forgot to hit the observation window in the back with its cover. So just please do it. We've got a bunch of these little pieces to assemble the actual support beams, and definitely pay attention to all of the holes that are, they're ventilation holes that are on our grow tent. You need to keep 2 of them open, okay? So you want to keep 1 open on the bottom on one side and 1 open on the top on the other side. You can vice versa if you need to, whatever works best for your setup, but you want to keep 1 of those open so that air can get in, and the other one will be used for our ducting for when we set up our ventilation system, so that ducting can get right out of that other hole. You also have another hole so you can get your electric wires in and out, and you'll tighten that up once you actually plug everything in so that, you know, there's no light penetrating through there. And that's it, okay? So let's go set it up.
So just one quick footnote, and I really was gonna just leave this off, but it really will save you so much trouble. When you're assembling your tent, the instructions, or at least the VivoSun instructions, say to put the entire frame together and then put the covering on it. I just really, really strongly recommend that you start installing the base inside of the actual tent, okay? Before you put it all together. It is so much easier to assemble it as you go. So start with the base, then you build upon that, and then you can just pull the cover over the top. And you just have to just stretch it out a little bit. Nothing like that's gonna rip or anything like that. But it's so much easier to assemble the base in the actual cover, okay? So I'll show you how I do that, and hopefully it's helpful. like, subscribe, all that other stuff, and I'll see you here on the next episode.